This video again is a little bit different. This is a podcast that Mart and I did back in 2013. This was our journey to get pregnant through 6 IUIs. And so this is our story that we put together in a podcast. We were telling our story. We think that this is definitely, could be valuable for some people. So we wanted to repost it online here on YouTube so that you could give it a listen if you wanted to. So thanks for listening and enjoy.
Hi, this is Kristen.
And this is Marit.
Welcome to the Lesbian Parenting Podcast. Hi there, this is Kristen. Thank you for tuning into Lesbian Parenting, the podcast, our journey to motherhood. This is episode number 3, and today we're going to talk about our experience with IUIs. So when we left off last time, we had done our first and second episode, which I hope that you guys enjoyed. And so we talked a little bit about starting the process of deciding to try to get pregnant and what some of the decisions we had to make along the way were. And so now we want to talk a little bit more about our process in doing the IUIs.
So in our last 2 episodes, we did talk a bit generally about the process of doing an IUI, but we thought that we would come back a little bit and share our story with you, our personal story from the beginning. So when we got to the point of seeing our nurse midwife and going into the orientation and moving forward with this process, there were some blood tests we had to do and have some physical exams. One of the things we realized that affected the timing for us was that there were a couple of vaccines that I was overdue for. So we wound up having to wait a few months to get that cleared out of my body before we could proceed. So we wound up having a little bit of a wait period, and that sort of allowed us the time to choose our donor and really get, I think, emotionally and physically ready to start the process. So once we got there, we said, okay, this is going to be the month. We're ready. We're medically cleared, ready to go. And the first thing we had to do was on the first day of my period, I had to call the office, the OB/GYN office, and let them know that my period had started. And from there, what you do is, we wound up scheduling a few sort of like dummy appointments. And those were based on when I thought I might ovulate. And those would be the best days to do the IUI. And at this point in our, since we had just started, we were just going to be doing 1 IUI per cycle. And that just came down to, finances and just, research. Research wasn't clear whether it was better to do 1 or 2. So we just decided we'll just do 1. Let's see where this takes us.
I think that's interesting. Maybe we should say a little bit more about that, because our midwife actually gave us the choice. We didn't really know that we could do 2 IUIs. So what happens, if you're not familiar with this, because we weren't familiar with it as well, is that you do back-to-back IUIs. So the idea is that once you get the happy face and know that you're ovulating, you know that you've had a surge and you're about to ovulate, but who knows exactly when that egg is going to be where it needs to be to meet the sperm. So the whole idea is, or the premise behind doing 2 IUIs is that, maybe if your timing is just a little bit off, you do 1 IUI the day after, I guess, you get your surge, and then, or the day of your surge, and then another IUI the day after. The whole point being is at least you have 2 shots of sperm going in, so that you maybe have, or some people think it's more likely, like you have a better probability of catching the exact point in time where you need to be. And Mart and I were concerned because it's, as you probably, if you're listening to this and you've looked into it and you've heard the other episode, is that sperm is really expensive. So it gets really expensive to do 2 IUIs back to back. So not only the cost of the sperm, but also the cost of paying for the IUI. And then even, let's say, time off of work if you need to do that. So we looked at all the research and to see if, it would be a detriment if we decided to not do 2 of them. But based on the research, it was semi-inconclusive. What we read to the point where it wasn't clear what the true benefit was doing 2 IUIs back to back.
Right. And so since we were just starting, we thought, let's just try 1 since it doesn't seem to be better one way or the other. I think, though, what you raise is a good point, that it really just comes down to timing. And when you're doing this naturally, when you're trying to conceive naturally, you're not doing ultrasounds, you're not doing blood work to see, how close you are to ovulating, or is it exactly the right time. you just go based on, the hormone surge that we just talked about, and, best practice, the day of or the day after, just to make sure that the sperm and the egg meet at the right time, as Kristen said.
So we decided just to do one IUI to start with, and that, maybe after like 3 tries, if we, weren't successful, maybe we would try a back-to-back IUI set.
Right. So we sort of had that in the back of our minds for the future, maybe that would be the next step for us. So I made my dummy appointments with the midwife to get the appointments in the calendar that were around the time when I think I'd ovulate. And then I would just, as those days approached and I was doing my ovulation predictor kits, if that morning I did not get the positive, then I would just call and cancel. And then the lucky day when I did get the smiley face or the positive surge, that's when usually the next morning I would go, we had a few steps to do.
So the other thing that we should talk about is actually prior to those appointments, what we had to do with our sperm, because that was an important part of something we needed for the appointment.
Right. So in the past couple episodes, I think we alluded to the fact that we had a local branch of the cryobank in Cambridge that we were having our donor sperm stored at. So part of the steps that we had to do, sounds a little cumbersome when I think about it. We had to, on the day the days prior to when we thought we would ovulate, we would have to make sure that we had called California Cryobank in plenty of time and let them know that tomorrow or whatever day we wanted to pick up the tank. So you had to place that order.
Yeah, we had talked about this, and Marit was saying in the episode we talked about cryobanks is that, you don't always necessarily, as much as you think the timing, you don't always necessarily know the timing. And there were a few times I think we were off by, maybe a day or two, and you had ovulated early, and then we were like, oh, we need to have them prepare the tank. We need to pick it up. And so sometimes if you don't give them like 24 hours notice, you'll have to pay a special processing fee.
Right. So part of what we were really conscious of is making sure that we place that order in time. So close enough, but not too close where we would have to order it on the same day.
So the other thing I think it's important to tell people is that, we were using Harvard Vanguard, and so our particular midwife that we were using and doing the IUIs, they don't store any of the sperm on their premises. And there are other places, like we had mentioned, Fenway Community Health, they actually will store sperm on the premises. So in our situation, we had to bring it with us. So we were in control. We had to be in control of our sperm at all points in time, but other places store it for you so that you don't have to go pick it up from somewhere else.
Right. So at least a few days before we knew we were going to ovulate, we would go to the branch in Cambridge, pick up our tank. Now, this is, of course, in liquid nitrogen, and it's good for, I think it was at least 5 business days, maybe 7 business days, that you could have that at home before you use it, and it would still be viable. So we always just planned around that. So we did our trip to the cryobank. We picked up our tank, kept it at home near the front door, waited for the day we'd ovulate, and then boom, we would just take it with us right to the office where we would see our midwife for the IUI.
All right. So now we can go back to when you do end up ovulating and get the happy face.
Right. So before you ovulate, you get the happy face. And then the next day is when, we had our appointment for the IUI. And so we would take our tank, drive over to our nurse midwife's office. We would arrive and, we'd get our vital signs done and all that good stuff. And then she would take the tank back. She would remove the vial and show us the vial to make sure that it was the right one.
It's very methodical.
Yeah. It's like a chain of custody thing. We have to sign some papers, make sure that we're handing it off to them. She's going to show us the vial, that it is in fact the right donor and it's color coded in the right way. And then she would take the vial back into the lab.
And thaw it.
Get it all ready, thaw it up. So it was about 20-minute wait. We would sit there and relax and talk about how excited we were that we were hopefully about to get pregnant. And then our nurse midwife would come back, and the procedure itself, I think we talked about this in the last episode, but it really took probably a minute, maybe 2 minutes. It wasn't even 2 minutes. It was probably a minute. It's basically as quick as getting a pap smear. The very first time we had the IUI, our midwife asked if Kristen wanted to push the plunger, literally, of the syringe to insert the specimen.
And I didn't want to, because I actually did not want to be, I did not want to screw up. And although it's not difficult, I just felt like I would not do it that time. Although in future times I actually did.
But then every other
easy.
Yeah.
It's very easy. She just tells you what to do.
Yeah. And I think it was special because I felt like we were both contributing. You know, it was as close as we could possibly get being in the office with our midwife.
So that was just our Labradoodle, and I can't edit that out, so I'll just keep it in there. So yeah, so in other times I did do the, Mark called it a plunger, but it's like whatever, I don't know. It's this little, it's like giving a needle, but it's like
a syringe.
Yeah. You just push the top down and you push it slowly. And our midwife told me what to do, and it was just have to do it slow. So it was pretty easy.
Yeah.
But yeah. So, and then after we did that, you would elevate your hips and we'd wait for like 20 minutes.
Yeah. We would rest in the office. She turned on the lights.
Oh, yes.
And we just rested there for about 20 minutes. And then we were released home. And really, you can just go about your regular activities for the rest of the day. There's no special, activity restrictions, except maybe, I think she did say,
Don't run.
Like, you don't want to be bouncing up and down a lot, like with a lot of...
Keep the sperm in.
No, the sperm's not going to fall out. It's just she didn't want us to suddenly screw up ovulation specifically. So just, and running can of course impact that. Literally, there's impact and it impacts that. So just letting everything sort of flow. But otherwise, I could go back to work, or if it was the weekend, we could just go relax at the beach or whatever.
I think that we should talk about the post IUI. I think that was the
2 week wait.
The 2 week wait, which I think we could probably do a whole podcast on the 2 week wait. But that was probably the most, well, there was a lot of anticipation over those 2 weeks.
The 2 week wait is really hard. I think anyone out there who has knowingly been in the 2 week wait, everyone knows that it's painful.
The first time that we did an IUI ever, I swear, like I Googled up what the signs of pregnancy were, and I swear, like I thought Mart had every sign. I was like, oh, you're tired. Oh, then you must be pregnant. Every single thing.
You become a little neurotic.
Yeah,
I think most people do, because you're so excited and so anticipating that day 14 pregnancy test, and every little thing you just wonder, does this mean I am pregnant? Does this mean I'm not pregnant? Could I be could the implantation be happening right now? Anything from A to Z you can think of, you will start hallucinating about, or imagining, or reading too much into, or worse, like Kristen, Googling everything, which is a huge mistake.
And then, so they call it the 2 week wait, but really, I would say most people don't wait 2 weeks until they do a pregnancy test.
Right. So of course, that 2 week wait feels like 300 years when you're in it. And sort of, if you know anything, you Google it. Even the least scientific person can probably find information online about the hormone that the pregnancy test picks up, HCG, and what the level should be the number of days post-conception. And so we knew exactly basically when conception would have occurred based on the day of the IUI, give or take. So we could count out, the HCG, if I'm pregnant, this is what the value would be by now. And therefore we know that a pregnancy test could possibly pick it up. So you become really anxious about saying, oh, should we do the pregnancy test now, like at day 9 or day 10 or how early? Or will we just be disappointed? Should we just wait? And it really consumes you, I have to say.
So I think our first IUI, we did the early detection pregnancy test, and so that we probably did it. You buy a package of 3, and we probably did it at day 8 or 9, and maybe not 8 or 9, maybe it was day 12. But anyway, we did it, and the first time when I thought every sign that you had, I thought we would definitely be pregnant. We weren't.
No. And it was disappointing.
It was very disappointing.
It was really disappointing.
Even though we knew the chances of getting pregnant the first time were probably next to nothing. I think your fingers are crossed just saying like, oh my God, this would be such a, I was thinking like, number one, emotionally, wow, only having to do this once. And then number two, financially, whoa, that was a good discount on sperm, because only if that being the case, only having to pay for that one thing of sperm. But no, we weren't pregnant.
No. It's a big letdown. I think when you put all of your efforts and energy into that, and you really just get swept away.
We did 6 IUIs, 6 cycles of IUIs. And I think the other thing is that your life becomes timed.
Yeah, in 2-week periods.
In 2-week periods.
2-week segments.
Yeah.
So the IUI, 2 weeks you're waiting for the results, and then 2 weeks you're waiting for your period to come. 2 weeks you're waiting to ovulate again. 2 weeks you're waiting to get the result, and so on. It just cycles and cycles, and we did them back to back whenever possible. We can get into that more detail later, but some people wind up, due to financial reasons or health reasons or whatever, that you can't do them back to back. But we just kept, we started in, I think it was February, and we just kept going. We just kept trying every month.
And so some of I guess this is a good time to say, I think, so we did 6 cycles of tries, and I think 2 of those times we did do back-to-back IUI, where we did 2 IUIs.
Right. So cycle. We did, and we also switched donors in between.
We did. Yes.
Right. So what we did was we started in, I think it was February. That wound up, the pregnancy test was negative. The second one we did in March. Pregnancy test was negative. The third one we did in April, and this was all the same donor. The third one we did in April, we actually got a positive pregnancy test,
which is very exciting.
It was absolutely thrilling. We were sort of beyond ourselves. And then, unfortunately, shortly thereafter, I noticed that I was starting to spot. And that in and of itself is not necessarily the end of the world. But by that point, I was already starting to get the HCG blood test, so the quantitative results, not just the home pregnancy test that shows whether you're pregnant or not. And the numbers just weren't rising the way they should. And then eventually they did just start to fall. So we knew that was a very early miscarriage. So that was a tough toll.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I hadn't thought about going into this that is very different than your average heterosexual couple, is because you're doing this on such a schedule, and then like in your situation they follow up with a blood test within 2 weeks. You end up knowing your values, those HCG values, early, whereas if you were a straight couple, you probably wouldn't go in for a blood test for like 10 weeks, 12 weeks for a while.
It would probably be well after you noticed you missed your period.
Right. So if you were a straight couple, you might have a miscarriage and not even know that was, or what, I guess it's not really called a miscarriage, but
well, it depends. It
how
depends
far.
when it is.
But I guess my point is that so basically a heterosexual couple might just think they got their period like a week late.
Right. When it's that early, sometimes they call it a chemical pregnancy. It depends how high your HCG levels get. So,
but in our situation, because you're doing an IUI, everything is so calculated, and then you go get the blood test so early, you then, like in Mart's case, like her HCG level was sort of lower, but then she had to go back like every 2 or 3 days to get it redone to see if it was climbing as it should be.
Well, because the gold standard is that it's at least doubling every 48 hours.
Right. So then that period, became a difficult time period because you're stressing about it. And again, Googling and reading everyone else's situation.
And I have to say, I got a little tired of going into the lab and being like, yep, I'm here again. It was just like, I just had enough, and I wasn't even someone who went to the doctor a lot before, so it was just like, really. And then I got all caught up on the numbers because there's something called, I think it's called the Database, and it's this database where they've been keeping all these HCG numbers of women. So then you can look at if you had at day 10 you had this HCG level, or I shouldn't say day 10, like day 14 you had this level. You can see how many women then had a healthy pregnancy based on how it was climbing. So I really overanalyzed way too much. So that wasn't good. Yeah, I think that just, it compounded itself. So the 2-week wait itself was so hard. And then you're just sort of grabbing at straws, wanting, no, I want this to work. We had a positive pregnancy test. And it's sort of like grabbing on the edge of a cliff and just feeling like you're falling. And it just doesn't, it's like, no, this wasn't it. This wasn't our time.
I think the other thing is that because it is so much more difficult to go through the process, like you can't just have, sex like like a heterosexual couple would, like, and everything is just so much more, there's so much more behind it that you have to do. And then to have invested so much, I think it's a lot more difficult than just for somebody who maybe just had sex for like 3 or 4 days in a row and then.
Well, I don't think that, I mean, I would hesitate to say that it's so much easier, so much less difficult for a heterosexual couple because they might also be doing the same timing that we are and really trying, and maybe they've been trying for a long time and it's not working.
Well,
but I think that in the initial stages, as Kristen mentioned, we wound up doing 6 cycles. A few months into that, I think we both became a little tired, just wishing that we have to go pick up the tank, we have to drive to the midwife office, we have to wait, we have to do this, we have to do that. We sort of just wish that we could have just done it at home.
Yeah, like if all you had to do was, and I don't say all because I know it's like I said, there are a lot of heterosexual couples that are having difficulty too, but if you just had to hop into bed, I mean, that's a little bit more different than having to do all this other stuff and pay, $700 a vial for sperm and for the IUI and everything. It's just, anyway, it felt like tough.
Yeah. So I think that there were really periods of time that it just felt exhausting and overwhelming, and other times when it was so exciting, and just, every time we went to do the IUI, it was so exciting. We both just felt, we were doing something really exciting together, and our hopes and dreams were going to come true.
So that was our 3rd time. So then we switched donors.
Well, and the reason we switched donors is because we had gotten the advice from our midwife that because we have the opportunity, neither of us are male. So we had the opportunity, we were using donor sperm to switch. And why not? If 3 times isn't working, maybe that wasn't the right donor for us because, I think we talked about this in some past episodes, but we agreed. She said maybe 3 or 4 times and then have a backup. And we said, we had only bought 3 vials from the start from this one donor. Let's just try a new one.
So we picked out new sperm.
Yeah. So it took us a little while, but we picked out a new donor. And at that point, we wound up having to wait a whole nother month anyway to make sure. So between April and May, we wound up waiting until June just because I had a very early miscarriage in April. We waited out May to make sure my body got back into its regular rhythm. And then we started again in June, right back on the wagon.
Yep. So we did.
With our new Olympic donor. You want to talk about that?
I don't know if he was in the Olympics in the end, but
Kristen was insistent that this must be an Olympian.
I don't know. No, his donor conversation, all they kept talking about him being an athlete and playing this club sport and would he be in the Olympics and whatnot. But it was still sort of vague. Like, I don't know what the club sport was, and I was trying to think like what's club sport. I was thinking soccer, but then I wasn't really sure, and so I don't know. So we just joked about the fact that maybe he was going to be in the Olympics, and
Kristen liked that. She said if we can pick sperm, we might as well go for like the best of the best.
Yeah,
and
it's expensive.
She thought she had a real winner with this one.
So then we did an IUI with we did
one IUI in June.
One IUI in June, and then
negative pregnancy test result from that.
And then we did again one in July.
One in July.
And then July. And then I'm trying to remember because I know that with...
No, we did 2 in July.
Okay.
So July we said we're going to start back to back.
All right. So we did 2 in July. No dice. We skipped August because we went... Oh,
nope,
no?
We didn't skip August.
Okay. So we did. So it was the end of August. So then in August we did 2 with this same donor. And we had a positive pregnancy.
Yep. We were so excited. We said, okay, this is going to be it.
It's the Olympian.
This has got to be it. We did back-to-backs. We finally got the timing right. We got a positive pregnancy test. That was in August, late August, mid to late August. And then about a week later, we were watching my HCG level. So, of course, we did the home pregnancy test. And then I went in by day 14, I went in for my blood work to get the quantitative. And that was a lot better than the last one from April. So we're like, oh, maybe this is really it. And then because my midwife was pretty conservative, she wanted to make sure it was doubling every 48 hours for at least, the initial period there. And the second blood test was like almost double, but not quite. And we're like, oh, like it's not quite there. And she said, it doesn't necessarily mean anything, but we should do it again in 48 hours because I really want to make sure that this continues to rise appropriately. And then the second one, it was now in it was somewhere in like the high hundreds, but again, not quite double. And then we did it again 48 hours later, and it was continuing to rise. I think by now it was like in the 400s or 500s, but again, not quite double. And around that time, I also started to notice. So this was about a week after the first positive pregnancy test. So it was, day maybe 24 of my cycle. So about 3 to 4 weeks after the insemination, and I started to have some spotting again. And so I got worried and I called my midwife, and there's really nothing you can do at that point. There's, and
one thing I want to interject and say I think is hard is that, so you look at these HCG levels, but sometimes healthy pregnancies just have a slow start. I mean, I think that's true. But, again, it's just something they keep an eye on. And sometimes healthy pregnancies, you spot.
That's right. Yeah. And that's what she said. I mean, I never felt like alarm. We talked almost every day, but she's never, felt alarmed. She did say that, after about a week, if we start doing this every 48 hours, she really wants to see a solid thing. Otherwise, she'd want to make sure that it wasn't an ectopic pregnancy or something like that, where you might, an unviable pregnancy where the levels continue to rise to a point. But then, we want to make sure also no harm is going to come to you if the pregnancy has occurred outside of the uterus, basically.
But I think it's just hard because you go through this 2-week wait, you get the positive pregnancy, you start getting the HCG level test. You have all these other factors, which you may be thinking like, oh, like this isn't a healthy pregnancy, but wait a second, it could be a healthy pregnancy. So you're still in this whole area where you don't really know what's happening. You're in limbo. Yeah. You have to embrace the fact that you have no idea what's going to happen.
And no control.
But at the same time, I don't know. It just like it felt like sort of like you're still having hope, but at the same time you feel a little like let down because you're like, why is this so difficult? And
I think you really helped support me through this, but really had to dig deep to have faith and also relinquish control, because there's really nothing that you can possibly do at this point. It really in some ways is a miracle of life, and there's, either this was it or it wasn't, and there's so many reasons of why it wouldn't work.
So that one wasn't. You found out.
Ultimately, we did find out that. So it was about, I think, almost to the 6th week, we found out that it was definitely a miscarriage, because that was when the numbers started. So it had gone up into like the 700s, and then it started dropping.
So that by that point, that was mid-September, and that had been our 6th cycle that we had tried.
Christian, you know what? The one thing we forgot to talk about.
What?
Back in April, when we had the first really early miscarriage that they call a chemical pregnancy, really, that was actually because of the results of my blood work at the time, the HCG quantitative result. Again, our midwife wanted to make sure, our midwife NOB, I should say, because she was always consulting with our obstetrician also. They really wanted to make sure that, because the levels were rising, just not the ways she would wanted them to, she really wanted to make sure that this wasn't an ectopic pregnancy. And that was the first time that I went for an ultrasound. And unfortunately, they wanted to make sure, did they see a gestational sac in my uterus? Although it would be really unlikely that early you'd see it. But anyway, they just wanted to check, and that there wasn't anything to indicate that there was a pregnancy outside of my uterus somehow, which is what an ectopic pregnancy is. If it occurred, if the embryo is in the fallopian tube. So that was it was very uncomfortable, especially at that time, because I had started to spot, and it was just very uncomfortable. And they're like, no, we don't see anything here. So that in some ways it was good. There was nothing to indicate that there was something worse happening. But unfortunately, that's also when they noticed. They're like, oh, you have a cyst on your right ovary. Did you know that? And I was like, no, that really wasn't the news that I was hoping to come here today.
Right. I mean, because you had never had
any symptoms.
Any symptoms or had reason to have had an internal ultrasound prior to that.
I had never had any ultrasound. There was no reason really why I had ever needed one.
Right.
So along this way, we also found out that I had this supposed cyst. although we didn't know for sure. And I mean, we didn't know for sure that it was a cyst. We knew there was a mass on my right ovary, but we didn't know what it was just by the ultrasound alone. So because they suspected it was probably just a dermoid cyst, our midwife and obstetrician just felt like this was something that we could just keep an eye on. You know,
Right. It shouldn't stop, that we shouldn't stop trying because of that.
There was no reason to stop just because of that. Everything was fine. There wasn't an indication that things were blocked up anywhere, especially since I was able to get pregnant. I mean, that was the one thing that she said, you know, the lining around the cloud was that I was able to get pregnant. And some people never even get there. So, you know, we had one thing working in our favor.
Right. So that was, I forget what I was saying. So that was six. So we did 6 cycles. So we had done 6 cycles. We had, you know, 1 chemical pregnancy, 1 miscarriage. And here we were still not pregnant. So we had to figure out like what our next steps were. And
do we have time today to talk about that?
Yeah, I think we should talk about that. So, okay. Next step. So basically we're really fortunate because we live in Massachusetts, which is a state that has
mandated
that insurance cover IVF.
Well, okay. It's mandated that once you're 35 years old, if you've been trying for at least 6 months, that coverage is mandated for infertility treatment.
So since we, you know, had met that criteria, Mart had just turned 30.
I had just turned 35.
35. We had tried 6 times. And so our next step was to, you know, go and talk to an endocrinologist and do all the tests to figure out if there was any reason why this wasn't working out for us.
Yeah. And I think what probably maybe a lot of you listening can relate to this, but I think Kristen and I just really we're like, there must be some reason why this isn't working. And I'm sure we must be able to pinpoint what it is, and then we'll fix that one thing or fix those 2 things and boom, we'll have a baby. And I think, again, it's just like, we're like, we must be able to fix this. There's something that we can switch, or maybe it's a vitamin or a procedure or some medicine. And I think also because we didn't mention this before, but one of the things that we discovered during the miscarriage in September was that my progesterone levels were just a little bit too low. And so I started on progesterone suppositories at that time. And it's funny because before we started the IUI process, of course, that was one of the things that was checked. And my progesterone level was absolutely fine. So for some, you know, but on the other hand, you know, that was one of the suspicious points that, well, maybe for some reason throughout the course of that time, it turns out that my body is just not having the progesterone level that's necessary to support a pregnancy. So it was like we're like, oh, well, maybe it's just that and we can fix that. And
so, well, I felt really, you know, fortunate that we were able to go see this doctor, and they did a ton of different tests over the next, I think it was like probably like 2 months, because it was around your cycle and different things and all kinds of different tests.
Well, so we had to wait about 3 or 4 weeks from the point we found the reproductive endocrinologist that we wanted to see in Boston. And we had to wait about 3 or 4 weeks to get that appointment. We're like, fine, we'll do that. I think by then it was October. And we went to see him, and we had a consultation. They did a ton of blood work that day. And we also sat down with the nurse who explained to us the rest of my cycle, what kinds of tests that they would do. So for that day, they could do, timing was not dependent on these tests. So they did all sorts of genetic tests and other baseline blood work. And then the rest of the blood work, by this point, the HCG in my system actually had not yet come down to negative. So my body was still like essentially clearing the miscarriage still. And until till the HCG went to negative, I actually couldn't even do any of the other tests, because I had to go back into my regular cycles again where I got a period. And it took a while. So again, this was already October. So it was sometime in November finally when HCG went to negative and I finally got my first real period again. And then day 3 was when I was able to get more blood work done. Again, this was all information that was fed to the reproductive endocrinologist to see sort of what was going on with my body, what was the quality of my eggs, that kind of thing. And then there also, within the next couple weeks, there was an ultrasound, and we also did an HSG, which is, for those of you out there who may not be familiar, it's basically a test where they want to see if your fallopian tubes are patent. And they inject this dye and do an x-ray and make sure that everything is open. We already suspected that it was because I was able to have 2 pregnancies, even though they didn't last. It's just sort of something that we had to do for my insurance purposes. So we had we had the ultrasounds to look at my follicles in general at the right time of the month, all this blood work. And then finally in early December, we sat down with our doctor again and looked at all the results. And we were like, aha, now we're going to find out why we didn't get pregnant.
And actually, there was no reason. It was just, what do they call it? Unexplained infertility.
Yeah.
Which was really good news because...
Well, it was good news, but it was like, wait a minute, we have no idea now.
Well, I thought it was really good news because I think that anyone probably in that situation is probably, thinking worst case scenario, like what's wrong? Because who knows what could have been wrong? Like egg quality could have been bad or whatever the case may be. So I was just really excited.
You're right. There was a silver lining there.
Was nothing... it was unexplained. There was no particular reason at that point. But one of the things that did come up was the fact that, you had this cyst that who knows what that cyst was doing in there. Right.
And at that point we were talking to our doctor about, are we going to, do we want to continue with IUIs, maybe medicated IUI cycles where they, boost up your egg production and better time the IUI, or would be interested in just going right into IVF.
And so based on our discussions with him and talking about different, just percentages and other factors involved, we decided that we did want to pursue IVF.
Right. Do we have time to talk about a little bit about that decision?
I think that's going to be next episode.
Okay.
So, the important thing I think to end with here is that, our next thing was going to be IVF. We decided that. And one of the important things that we needed to do to be able to do IVF is you have to get those cysts removed. So Mart had to have the cyst removed before we could move forward with that.
Right. And that's only physically, it would not be safe to proceed with IVF, putting any needles into my ovary with that cyst being in the way.
Wow. So that was a lot of information today. So yeah, that was our whole experience with IUIs and a little intro to our next episode, which will be talking about IVF and what we've gone through as we embark on this journey into IVF. And that's all. Take care.
Thanks for listening. See you in the next episode.